Should have it. Yeah, no, two people need to
Because there's a smaller audience, they're really not gonna get picked up. So chatting now, 5 minutes, you got 5 minutes, chatting.
You're not on.
Yes.
No,
Sorry.
You know what, you can,
streaming.
No, we don't have enough followers yet.
you can put your letters.
And it's the visual, it's crisper.
Yes.
But trying to get this aligned, this whole room is not blocked.
We should have.
Oh my God, yeah, I know. Yeah, well, this was in our. Squeeze past before we sit. Okay, thank you.
Well, that's, you know.
Thank you for coming over here. Last time we did one of these, I think we were still on Zoom meetings. Or your dining room, I was in the sunroom.
You can't control, it has to be another.
Well, they rearranged the council table, give everybody space. So we chairs back here. And also the shoes with the camera on. I know it was just the other night.
I just don't see it.
They rearranged it for that.
Sometimes that's how it works.
Well,
Yeah.
well, you know how mine is. So anyway,
Actually,
there's one other item on the agenda, but you're first. So, maybe some questions, but, well, thank you for everything, Laura.
Yeah, no problem.
It's good.
You bet.
No, Sean, I
It's nice to have.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a core function.
Right.
I'm sure people want to hear it.
Yeah, very true.
And we're just lucky that you guys have a relationship at the ball.
read the order. Rise and pledge to the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Hart?
Here.
Ms. Cook? Here. Ms. Eisenhart?
Here.
Ms. Falcone?
Here.
Ms. Hassler?
Here.
Ms. Pummer? Mr. Stocklet?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Okay, you want me to announce the executive session? There's an executive session held on February 20th regarding labor negotiations with Teamsters Local 773 and also personnel matters. That was with Attorney Boland from our office on the labor negotiation matters.
And old business?
With us again tonight are representatives from PFM. I don't know if you just want to do like a 5-second review
Yeah.
for the public who have not attended.
Not a problem. And with also with Peter Edmund, Stevens, and Lee, so we'll kind of talk about who we all are and what we do. So just briefly, we were asked to put together a financing proposal for various capital needs for the borough. That included projects for roads, water, and sewer projects. And the concept behind it was to do one issuance of debt for purposes of each one of those special needs. Each fund that pays for the individual pieces of debt, generally speaking, should be covered by your current budget outside of the water project. So that's a different conversation. But the way we set it up would be the road projects would be offset by a portion of your liquid fuels fund going forward, and then anything over and above that would be covered by your budgeted real estate tax that you're already collecting on that side. The sewer projects would be about a $300,000 amount that would be covered by your current budgeted debt service for sewer for the next year and a half-ish. And then the water projects, based on a $700,000 total project, would be on its own because you don't have any water debt currently. In all of the cases, we would not have a budgetary impact in 2025. It would start in 2026 either way, because we have some additional funds set aside to kind of cover the interest expense for that calendar year. So that's the big picture. In all of the cases, we structured that way to keep the budget as best as possible. And obviously, as a board, you need to consider which capital projects make sense for you from both a useful life as well as a reasonable expectation to make sure that you're doing the things necessary for the public infrastructure. So that's what the conversation was. After we discussed to see what your thoughts were on the capital project needs. From there, we did go back and forth with J.P. Morgan Chase. You might recall we had a couple of proposals that made economic sense. We watched the market, got the most recent quote this morning, and it's still best with the J.P. Morgan Chase proposal. Although the rate went up slightly on a couple of spots, it wasn't enough to make up the difference between the Webster Bank versus the J.P. Morgan. So what we have in front of us is a live quote from this morning. It is good until 3 o'clock tomorrow p.m. So that's the way the process works for them. What has happened since is Peter, on your behalf, made a public advertisement in the Reading Eagle for authorization of a maximum borrowing amount, which we'll talk about in a second, for these purposes. The notes itself would be considered general obligations of the borough, even though we've talked about this being paid by different funds. As far as the bank understands it and how the taxpayers understand it, is backed by the general taxing power. It just happens to be covered by various funds. Okay. Everything else that Peter will discuss is really kind of boilerplate requirements under state guidelines for any formal approvals of outstanding debt. This is no different than how we did it in previous years. It just happens to be an issuance for this year. I'm going to just run through some numbers real fast. I think everyone should have a copy of today's presentation. So we got this today around 3 o'clock, so I apologize for the late receiving this, but it took a little while for it back to get us to the advisory. So as described, we have one series that we'll do, but it'll be broken up by 3 separate sub-series by each fund. And I'm briefly just going to run through a couple of the pages for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions after we do that. On page 3, which is the side, you turn it sideways. It's not sideways for you. It's sideways for me. It's a blue.
This one?
Yeah, it's this one, yes. In this particular, this is very similar to what you've seen before when it comes to the breakout of how the debt service would work. So we wanted to show you what each fund and how it would be paid. So this is the similar summary as before. So the blue box would be the related road projects or the general fund related debt service. As we described earlier, you currently budget about $115,000 a year in your annual budget for your current portion of your current debt. The borrowed funds of about $1 million would then be amortized over 13 years. And the way the structure would work out is we would then ask you to consider dedicating a portion of your liquid fuels money starting in 2026 that would cover the difference between what you're currently budgeting and what the total principal and interest would be. So it would offset those two things. So from your perspective and from the taxpayer's perspective, these projects would be offset by the general fund, okay? And a little bit of liquid fuels. The yellow is the portion related to the balance of the sewer project. So remember that a portion of your debt service, about $260,000, is currently budgeted, and you need about a little over $300,000 to cover that portion of the balance of the project, which is tied to both ARPA funds, a grant, and then these proceeds. So we structured this very similarly in a concept where when your debt would drop off, starting next year, you fill in some principal to cover the balance. So you would have no budgetary impact on the sewer fund, and the debt would mature in 2027. So a little bit of interest expense would be paid, but it would allow you the funds necessary to do the sewer project.
How much are you saying we have in ARPA funds for this year or next
Stacy, I
year?
can give you a good answer to that.
Approximately 85,000.
How much, I'm sorry,
85,000
for this year?
forever. That's the last amount that we have.
And that gets put toward this, is that what you're saying?
You've already.
That's what council obligated prior to the end of
Right.
2024.
And then the third column, which is the green, which is much of the discussion that we'll have, is there's some water projects that you have coming down the road. There's kind of three major ones that are coming down the road, and we wanted to include those as a possibility to fund a portion of those with this transaction. What we've kind of put together since is just some projected analysis to kind of help you think about what those impacts could be, because this is just one piece of what you may need in the future for water-related projects. The decision point of how much you want is entirely up to you. We advertise for the maximum amount, as we described at the last meeting. This makes the assumption that you'll get about $700,000 at settlement to go toward some of the water projects. Again, keep in mind the impact of this borrowing would start in 2026, but it still would hit your budget next year. Okay? So when you take all three of these sub-pieces for each one of these projects, you would have the black page, the black section would be that you have a borrowing of $2,135,000. So that would be each little individual piece. That's the principal balance, and that's the total that's shown on that. Again, how you think about it is how it hits your budget, but it's one kind of large loan on how the bank sees it. I'm going to stop for a second if anyone has any questions on the concept. Okay. Following the next few pages, these are just, again, backup information, but it is matching with what we've talked about in general. So page 5 would be this combined loan, and you might remember from the last meeting, the bank essentially offered different rates for different portions of the debt. So when you see various, it just means that there's a different rate for each individual piece. Blended together, it's about 4.44%, give or take. So based on the blended interest rates that were offered, this would be the combined loan that technically you'd be issuing if you did all of this. The following 2 pages are just following 3 pages, I apologize, are the individual schedules tied to each fund. So again, that's how you can think about it from a budgetary impact, but that's the individual amortization schedules based on the current rates. And then finally, on page 9, this is what we call sources and uses of funds. And this just means this is the math calculation of how much money you need to borrow to do everything that we've described. So that includes deposit of funds to go toward the projects. It would cover the cost of issuance, and it would cover the interest expense in the 2025 calendar year, as we talked about. So there's no impact. So we borrowed some funds for that. Between all of those things, that would cover it all. And again, as I mentioned, the average rate is about 4.44% on all of the debt when you think of all the individual interest rates. Should you decide to move forward with this full amount, or We would settle on the transaction on March 24th. So that's when the funds would be available to you as the borough to deposit into your accounts. I'm speaking for Stacy here. I did have a conversation with the folks at Pliget and talked about accounts that you can put these funds in. They reached out, I believe, and you have a call scheduled with them in a weekish. If that account, if you decide to move forward, you could put the funds with Pliget. At today's interest rate for Pliget is about 4.5%. So we can get you exactly the rate that you would be paying blended currently as an opportunity to deposit funds. And as I said, I wanted to make sure you knew that. So we did that work as well. The balance of the pages are just a little bit more backup, including what your budgeted schedules look like. The proposal itself from JP Morgan is at the end. And again, it summarizes everything that we described already as far as the individual proposed interest rates. The loan, it's one more thing, I apologize, one more thing to add is the Series A and the Series C. So it's broken up into A, B, and C. They both have a call provision on June 1st, 2028. So that just means that in the future, you will have the opportunity to refinance if interest rates go down on those two pieces. The sewer doesn't have it because it's really short, so there's no opportunity there. So conceivably, if you receive grant funds or outside other funds or interest rates go down, you will have the flexibility to refinance or pay down principal at your option. So that's it.
Did you say that was 2028?
Correct.
And then beyond that, we're not locked in, it's only during that year or after that?
Anytime.
Anytime thereafter.
So that's your option. And again, if by chance a year from now there's funds that are received, you can take those funds and pay down principal tomorrow, essentially. I mean, this just gives you the flexibility to do that. So I'll stop. I know there's a lot of information here, but it's similar to what we've talked about in the past.
When you did the average of the interest rates, did you include this 1.19% to make that rate 4.4? So it's just basically the three amounts we're borrowing for today come to that.
Correct. Yeah, that's under tax law. It's one combined issuance, so it matters for these ones.
Okay.
So to your point, your outstanding debt that you currently have is at 1.19, and you'll have 4-ish%. So on average, this comes out to be 3-ish%.
Could you also explain, we had talked on the phone about the balance as we move forward. If we had a grant and wanted to pay off part of this, is the amount owed amortized all the way to the end, or when we make a payment, do we get a savings on the interest because we're making a future payment to pay down the principal? How does that work?
Yeah, the way that the loan is set up is it is prepayable anytime on any date after June 1st, 2028. The easiest what banks traditionally do is, let's just pick a number. Let's say you borrowed the full $700,000 or $7,000, and let's say you got $300,000. What more than likely would happen is economically they'd probably take it off the end of the loan, so your payments toward the end, which would reduce your principal balance, which would then reduce the total overall payment from that point going forward. There's a possibility we could go to the bank and say, hey, let's readjust individual principal payments. We could do that. Traditionally, the easiest button is just to hit the end, which would shorten up your loan and also reduce the most interest expense. But that's what we would.
So we would get a savings on interest, it wouldn't amortize out that we're responsible for it.
Yeah, the second you pay that principal back is when you start saving. So that's why when we talked about this last time, yes, you're paying more when you borrow more, but the economic advantage of borrowing the amount necessary for the project, and then if you do happen to get other funds, I'd rather you start at a higher number and then pay it down than start at a lower number and go, oh my God, I need more money, because it's just more costly for you to start over and do it. I mean, I would never stop you from trying to find outside funding to cover some of these projects. It's just you're paying costs one time anyway. You just have to budget for these payments.
Every time we do a refinance, we're paying costs also.
You are, and we would take that into account, of
Rates.
course, definitely. We would never not show you the net impact if we did refinance.
Some of the documents we've been given earlier showed Penvest. Are you doing any of the small loan with
Not currently,
Penvest?
yes, so what we wanted to do to kind of give you some background was we as a firm, and for some clients, we prepare rate studies or rate projections when going into funding of transactions, because we feel that it is, number one, a valuable tool for our clients to understand the impacts of some of the borrowings, one, and two, we also feel that because many years go by sometimes before people consider doing rate studies, we think updating those all the time. So we used our models for purposes of understanding, building out a projection for what the impact would be on if you do nothing at all, if you borrow funds for some capital needs, or a little less capital needs, to give you an idea. So as part of that analysis, we did project an assumption that you would borrow through another program in the future for the other project, with an assumption that you received a grant. I can't tell you if that's gonna happen or not, but we wanted to build a model, just so we had it for planning purposes. And certainly Penvest would be an option for you as a potential use for future funding if you chose. But we want to at least put something down for purposes of planning.
Did I understand correctly, they have an annual $25,000 audit
Yeah, so
requirement?
the way that the program works, and this is I would still call it a quirk, but under the program, because it has federal and state money that kind of builds their program, one of their requirements is to have what's called a single audit created as part of having a loan through their platform. So unfortunately, the economics of doing smaller loans for local governments, it makes it less efficient, because if you think about it, let's say you lock in a rate at 2% with Penvest over a 20-year period, let's say that's the rate, 2%. But you are required to have a single audit done each year during those 20 years. I've been told the cost of having that single audit is close to $20,000 to $25,000. So when you take those two numbers, it's not that efficient. So our viewpoint is, to say that you go out, ask for funds, hopefully you end up getting a grant as part of it, and if you do, because you're required to have that single audit, it kind of offsets some of those additional costs. So I have a client in Percy Regional Authority up in Bucks County that they had some PFAS-related projects on their system, and they received a grant of $800,000, but they were required to do a $300,000 loan. And the loan's at a good rate, but $300,000 plus $25,000 makes the overall loan less efficient, but because they received such a large grant, they were happy to take it. So it's, when you go through the process, you'll learn more about that. But for purposes of tonight, we wanted to at least help you think about kind of planning for kind of future capital needs. And again, we have other staff to kind of consider those options.
So that I and everyone here could understand precisely how this works. For the road fund, is that Fund A we're doing? To be used, since we are putting liquid fuels money into it, there's restrictions on how that money can be used.
Correct.
If we, say, replaced a water pipe, and then we went ahead and did gravel, and then we did an asphalt patch, would we then be able to go over an asphalt patch with some of that money, or is that excluded?
I know Stacy and Joan might have had a put you guys on the spot, but we're separating this for a reason,
Yes.
because the state program requires that you have separate purposes for the money. So that's why we have it separated out. There is definitely an audit process, like again, when money starts coming in, there's a traditional audit process. So you have to work directly with the team at the state to make a determination of how you use the funds to make sure it fits within the standards that they have.
Right, and there's also, with liquid fuels, there's a set of auditors with the Auditor General's office that does the liquid fuels audit.
So I know
So
it's
we
for road work, but I'm not sure, and I know if you were building a new bridge and putting in piers or something and then to go over that, that's not allowed. And I guess just to go over a water pipe, that's not a lot, but I was wondering if we'd gotten the road to a point with a patch where people could drive on it just fine, and now we are enhancing the road, is that allowed with liquid fuels?
Well, that's the kind of thing that we generally talk about with our municipal services representative at PennDOT, Mr. Paris. And I know that there have been conversations with PennDOT Municipal Services as to whether whether the use of liquid fuels funds to offset with these loans is appropriate.
So we just have to be careful on how we do it ultimately. That's why this is the starting point, is to have it separate like this, to give you that
Just
flexibility.
wanted a yes or no if that would be covered by liquid fuels.
Yeah,
We don't know, do you know?
Yes, so I have discussed this in depth with Charlie Paris before this was finalized by PFM. So what their recommendation is to do any work underneath the ground and then overlay. So these $1 million for streets would be for street overlay.
So replacing water pipe.
Would not be under the street overlay $1 million. You cannot touch the street overlay money to do anything underneath the ground, like water mains, like sewer mains.
Right, so that's why
So you
water.
do that first and get that done, and then overlay anything that you need to
I guess
overlay.
I'm not sure,
Well, that's why the
I've never
water
worked
and
in this
sewer,
business.
that's why the water and sewer loans are separate, because of these regulations and because we want to make sure that liquid fuels money is used to offset the road portion of this project only, and that was part of Stacy's conversation with Mr. Paris at PennDOT Municipal Services.
So having the patch done, having it looking like a road, but it needs maybe overlay on it, that wouldn't be considered liquid fuels overlay. Would that
Yes,
go-
it can, as long as everything water-related or sewer-related is complete.
Okay,
Yep. Inspected, up to par,
oh,
and
okay,
complete.
excellent, okay. Because it seemed like we were taking a lot for roads when sewer and water desperate need of stuff.
Carol, are you asking about like the asphalt we put after we put the gravel, we replace the pipe, we fill in the dirt, the gravel, we pack it down, and now that little bit of asphalt patch that goes there temporarily till we do an overlay, are you asking if that patch is
Does
part of
that,
it?
no, is that overlay covered?
And that would be yes, the patch, no.
Great, okay, excellent.
So I have a question about the timing here, because I thought I read something in here where this money, we had to use a certain portion to get rolling, and by the third year, we had to have at least 85% of it had to be committed, and we've got water pipes that have to be done, that's gonna take time. And we have, work at the pump station. Will we have all the water lines done in time to overlay the streets, or do you have particular streets? Because that's kind of why I wanted a strategic plan, to see what is our plan on what streets will we be paving with that because that $1 million isn't gonna go far. When we start paving, it's gonna go really fast. I mean, it's,
I would reference back to the studies that have been shared with Julie and her predecessors for the streets chair.
Ethan had given us a list, I just didn't know which ones we were planning on as like to go in this order.
Priority or?
Because will we have these things done, because we have 3 streets that we'll be replacing the main. And that's gonna all get done and settle for a while before we can then overlay. So that $1 million for overlaying, will we meet the timeline for that?
It's a reasonable expectations to spend the money within 3 years. I know your engineer's not here tonight, but I saw him nod. So
Okay.
we won't have any problems meeting the test for purposes of reasonable expectations. Yes, I agree with you that, when this money sits in your accounts, you want to make sure that as a board, you're making the strategic decisions of deciding which ones make sense from a priority standpoint as well as just a financial impact, and you're supposed to spend money. So, yes, you will make those decisions. It doesn't have to be decided tonight. That's a future kind of board conversation, but you'll have the funds available for those projects.
My concern is that in 3 years' time, we're blowing through $1 million, and then we're paying debt for 13 years, 10 additional years.
Yeah, you
But
gotta
we're
make
not
some
gonna be
decisions.
able to do any roads or anything, because all our money's gonna be sunk for now a decade beyond this repair. That's a long time to not have any money to do any other streets or any other projects.
So really the balance of, just obviously what we have here is just really the backup information associated with kind of the whole picture here. The ordinance, as mentioned earlier, the ordinance which was prepared by Peter, reviewed by Joan, has been properly advertised from JP Morgan. All of the necessary documentation is ready to go based on the full amount that was offered. So we've hit all those purposes. I will stop. I know that we've had some, conversation about, impacts and things like that. I'm happy to kind of give some additional general information on it, but, that's where we are right now.
Thank you, Jean.
I have some big concerns, because I was running these numbers. I'm talking specifically about the water, the monies we need to raise to do our water system repairs. And this proposal, and by the way, this proposal is for all users, it increased, I'm assuming, because when I look at the amount of money that you're looking as our revenue source, you're taking into account not just residential, but commercial and industrial rates. You're using the total of all those as your number, but here it looks like this is residential is only going up. But it appears that all three of our rents will go up by the amount you're suggesting in the.
We just illustrated for purposes of single users of residential, which is I think what you're of course very much focused on. But for, planning purposes, if you're gonna make an increase on rates, which I suggest that you would do, for any purpose, whether you borrow this money or not, there should be some considerations because of the buildup of your reserves for future uses, one way or the other. But how and when you make that decision point obviously is a question for the board in the future. But we built a model to make the assumption that the rate increases that were necessary would be covered by all of the users.
One thing you didn't know, and many of the new board members may not know, is that a few years ago, Michelle Stout did a pretty in-depth, she did a great job doing a very in-depth examination on the rates that we charge our commercial and industrial users. And they were substantially lower. We saw that we were gonna hit the wall financially and be negative. That wasn't something weren't aware of. You're showing here would be about 60,000 negative in 5 years if we do nothing, right? And that's pretty consistent. Actually, Michelle, I think, had a slightly higher rate of negative she thought we'd be at. And when she looked at the rates, she didn't want our commercial and industrial users to have sticker shock. She raised the rates by 50%. It was her recommendation to step it up 50%, then 75%, and then 100% increases. We only did the 50%, which started in the beginning of 2024, I think.
Yes, with an ordinance
Yes,
in
right, that's when
2023.
we did the ordinance.
Yes.
So I pulled my minutes to just kind of refresh my memory on this. Even with the 100% increase in the water budget, she still thought that we'd have some difficulties in having enough money for capital improvements. And at that time, she was really only specifying the well, the secondary well that we wanted to do. Didn't have anything to do with the water main replacements. That kind of came about later. So my concern is, and what I'd like to see, is I'd like to see if, what our numbers would look like for our residential users if we increased the rates like she had suggested, bump them up to 75, then maybe did another year, do the 100%, see what kind of revenue we can project that's gonna give us, and then look at the increase for our residential users. I ran the numbers based on the rates, and with the $700,000 amount, I mean, if a family, and I don't know that this is accurate, but they looked at as a family, the average user, which really isn't accurate, it says it's 12,000 gallons for the average, which that includes our commercial and industrial users as a whole. All of our water averaged out is 12,000 gallons per user. These rates are extreme. It would be a 20% increase in next year, then a 10% increase, and then 7% every year thereafter. And that's just a very, very high increase. We increased rates by 20% back in 2023, and our commercial and residential rates are still well below where they should be. I'd like to see some different projections here to see where our numbers would fall. And it also looks like that 700,000 is only for water main replacement, it's nothing to do with the well.
We built part of the model to make an assumption that you borrowed or, received funds from Invest as well as through a grant and a loan.
Right,
For future
okay,
years.
okay, all right.
To get for planning.
So it's, okay, so it's, all right.
But we're not gonna do Pinvest.
For this particular transaction.
Right, that's not gonna happen.
Yeah, again, we wanted to think holistically, just for planning purposes, that in the future, we may consider it for one of the projects. What I suggest here is that you don't pay cash for projects. You shouldn't do that. You should be amortizing your projects over a long period of time, because that will allow you to amortize it for the use of projects. And that's what my suggestion would be.
I mean, we will recoup some of our interest that we're paying out, we'll be getting while that money sits till it gets used. I mean, the principal's gonna be being reduced out of the projects, but 4.4% from Pliget, right now, that's nice, because we're not really, but once we start using that amount that we have in savings, of course, that's gonna dwindle. So that factored in, we would probably have a lower interest rate if you use that towards, some of,
You don't have it.
we don't have,
You don't have other money to utilize to reduce the borrowing.
oh, no, I understand that.
So the goal here is for you to, if you in the future borrow some additional funds, build enough reserves to allow for additional capital needs, so you can afford future rates, future projects if necessary, and have enough reserves in case there's any emergencies. That was the concept behind whatever plan you
yes,
opened.
once
And
we
again,
get, once we get this paid, I'd also like to see if maybe these projections could be out, maybe instead of 5 years, if we'd stretched it another year, like what would that do if we increased the commercial rates as we were planning, through what Michelle had stated, and then looked at the revenue that would come in from those, and then look at the residential. We're looking at, for a family that uses 12,000 gallons per quarter, it would be $269 a quarter in 5 years.
Not counting the sewer.
It's just-
No, that's
With
including
sewer.
sewer. This is the whole kit and caboodle. And these numbers here don't show the rest of the picture. We've got $93.60 a quarter that every user spends in their bill for sewage. So adding that to a 20% increase in water for next year, you're looking at 2026, the base rate would be $156.60. Is that what you came up with, Scott?
I just did mine is based
Your
on
personal.
just my own personal water use.
How much water do you
How much
use?
water do you have?
9,000 gallons.
A quarter?
Yeah, like I actually have my bill right here, so I
Yeah,
use
so,
9,000 gallons.
like I said, when we run our analysis for other municipalities, We understand that there's some users that have, single users that are at the limit, but the, industry average is a 12,000 gallon per quarter. So, I don't know what your family of what, I think you had a couple, yeah, so that's not surprising.
I was trying to calculate out the 1,000-gallon overage cost, and that I didn't see in here, so I kind of crunched it by just backing out the base rate based on the 12 average. I don't know if that's the correct number, because the way we're structured is we have so many dollars per 1,000 over the 4,000 base rate. So I came up with, every year that grows by, $1.50, or $1, say, every year.
Yeah, one thing that's important to point out is, for any projection, you have to make an assumption of what the inflationary costs will be on the operations. So in all the cases that when we ran the analysis, we made an assumption that the operating costs would go up by 2% each year on both operations and on revenues as well. Because that gives you some background behind those additional costs. So, traditionally, we suggest for our clients that are thinking about doing capital, it's always easier to do kind of smaller step, over the course of time. But if you don't do rate increases, then you have a larger number necessary, especially because there's an accumulating inflationary cost that comes from that. So
I hope it's 2%, because I was crunching some numbers, and I'm just, crunching numbers and not doing it with a computer and just looking at our expenses. We have some very high unknown expenses coming forward. I'm thinking it's a much higher number than that.
yeah,
Between our
the
material
last couple
costs
of years,
and
it's
our.
much higher than 2%.
Yeah, so that just seemed kind of low to me. That concerns me, because the other thing is with these rates that I crunched, these numbers, that assumes no increase in sewer costs. That's just what we'll be looking at. I just think
The
it's.
good news about your sewer is, based on the structure that we have in place, the debt will fall off starting in 2027, okay? So
We can borrow some money.
you should be able to build up your sewer fund to give you that flexibility in the future if you need to upgrade, do any upgrades to the sewer fund.
Well, it's on our heels. The DEP wants us to now meet different standards for our copper and magnesium, so that might require a lot of new filtration, and who knows what that's gonna cost. We didn't even go there yet.
Yeah, it's you're not alone here. I know you've heard me say that probably in previous conversations, but for systems that have 1,000 or so people, capital costs have gone up higher than you're used to over the last few years, and your amount of users hasn't increased by that much. So the end users have to kind of cover those costs under the current structure. We hope that if there's future opportunities for you to get backing or grants or other things, that will hopefully offset some of those things. But it's never not going to stop. You only have so many customers to offset the cost of capital. So when you guys are planning for future rate increases, whether it's on the water side or the sewer side, you'll think about all places. You can say that yeah, we have to do this because our water projects are necessary for today, and if you're able to over the next couple of years offset your sewer needs by not having to raise rates on that, then one pocket is not hit as hard since you're able to kind of build up some of your sewer as well. So it's not a great answer, but that's just the way you'll have to think about it.
Well, it's very clear we need to raise capital to do what we need. That's not in question. I feel kind of rushed because I didn't really get much out of the first two meetings because I had to digest all this. And then today, I'm getting stuff right before I'm coming to this meeting, and I'm trying to analyze information in an hour. And I just know personally, when I work with my own personal debt and expenses, I want to make sure I'm looking at all the options and all the different schedules, and I should do nothing different than for my community as well. And I just feel like, personally, it's just me, I feel like I would really like to see the projection done out a little differently before I make a decision, at least on the water portion. I'm okay with the other two areas, because I think that they're pretty set.
Again, we do a lot of projections for people. I find 5 years is a good number to use, because once you go past 5 years, you're really already shooting in the air, because costs of projections just lose value as you go farther out. you look at the numbers going out to 50, or all you're really gonna see is your debt service is gonna stay exactly the same, and your operational costs are gonna go up by 2%. So, you know, that's all that's gonna happen. Again, I would strongly suggest that, you know, you get a, you know, rate study, you know, a formal rate study done in the future after you decide to do any financings, and you do it every 2 or 3 years as a look, so you can get a better
What do you mean by
understanding.
rate study?
An actual rate study, like someone would prepare for you.
And it could include engineering based on new regulations that you now have to meet standards with, like we have for our sewage treatment plant or our water plant.
Yeah, I mean, what we provided you was, you know, I would call it a pseudo rate analysis to help you kind of see the big picture without feeling uncomfortable about what you're gonna potentially put yourself in. You can do a more formal rate study by, you know, individuals or firms that can handle that. And again, our suggestion with our clients is don't wait every 10 years to do it, because what you thought 3 years ago is completely different than what it is today, because the market moves.
I just wanna see what the numbers look like if we increased commercial and industrial rates.
How many users do you have on the commercial side?
We'd have to look for that information, but I don't have it, I think, at my fingertips here.
Yeah, it's just,
But
you know, you've
I'd
got to
like
throw
to
that
see-
into next year.
But I'd like to see, probably have at least a dozen industrial and maybe 50-some commercial.
I think it was.
That's a good
And
approximation.
I'd like to see if their rates were put to increase, what that dollar amount would be. And then, because we may end up having maybe a 4% increase with our residential users moving forward, rather than hit with a 20, and then 10%, and then 7, or whatever it was, 7, or some of these are different, 7% increase every year thereafter for the remainder of the 5 years.
Yeah, you can do that analysis, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, I'm not suggesting you don't look into the breakouts of your different user base. I think you'll probably come up with a similar answer in the total revenues that you'll generate based on the type of users you have. I mean, I think it's possible you could slice and dice and have your utility, you know, your industrial rate go up a higher percentage than your residential rate or your commercial rate, and come up with a similar answer.
Well, we have a three-tiered level with the rates, so industrial was.
Yeah, I think you should look into that, definitely.
I'd like to before I decide, at least on that portion of the borrowing, just me personally, I feel like I was a little bit rushed here, just because we had a meeting there last week and it wasn't understood what exactly, you know, these charts and stuff are pretty, but I, you know, really just wanted the basic numbers, like, you know, what are our customers really gonna pay on base rate, and what is the extra per 1,000 gallons? Because I'm gonna have people I'm gonna have to answer to. We got over 2,000 people. Thank you for your time.
And the deadline is tomorrow, right?
You should authorize this tonight.
Yes, the purpose of this meeting is to vote on the ordinance that would authorize entering into the issuance of the debt, the issuance of the note, and also all of the procedures that go with it, including the post-enactment advertising and the application to DCED.
John, could we hold a special meeting in a few days?
We gotta know tonight,
They have to.
because they, tomorrow,
Right, because
tomorrow
of
at 3
the-
o'clock is the deadline.
Right,
These rates are all good now.
right, they lock in
Yeah,
for short
well,
periods of
rates
time.
change every day, that's, you know, they were up and then they came down, and they'll probably go up and down, I mean, rates are.
I mean, your determination of how you want to adjust your rates in the future, that's a conversation for a future meeting. I think that makes perfect sense. I think you should do that. Do the due diligence to figure out what the mathematical calculations are on your water and your water rates. You know what the number is in your annual debt service, it'll be about $80,000 per year. based on a $700,000 amount necessary for those capital projects. You end up using less than the $700,000, then you can essentially cut that in half for purposes of planning purposes. But, I mean, I don't think that should, my humble opinion is, you can work through that from a budgetary standpoint and get the money so you can do the sewer projects and get the road projects done as well.
Right, one thing about this is you do not have to use the full amount even if you authorize it. That's what this ordinance is, authorizing the issuance of that full amount, but it's not a requirement that you commit or use all of it.
There you go.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So if we decide we don't want to go with $700,000 amount, we can make it less?
Yes.
Before settlement, of course,
And settlement is in 30 days?
essentially.
Right, after the DCED approval.
The alternative to that is, again, is you could settle with the full amount, and then, you know, you decide, we're not, all the project doesn't work first, and you write a check and pay back the principal.
You'd be able to repay that with no penalty, is that correct?
Well, you put it back in an escrow to 2028.
Okay.
Yes, you could invest it.
So really, what my concern is, really, is that I need to know what our customers in our town are gonna be paying for water and sewer. I mean, we need to have a hard number. I mean, these numbers based on this makes me go, whoa, there's no way I can afford to have water in my house or sewer anymore. I mean, the base rate goes up pretty substantial.
We're gonna end up putting the rates up no matter which way we
Well,
look
I
at it.
understand that, but I
Yeah,
guess
it's
the
like-
20% hit and then 10% hit, when we had already talked about increasing the other rates, so I would like, maybe, I don't know, Stacy, maybe you could do a calculation on if we increased our commercial and industrial rates as per Michelle had said, let's say 70%. We jumped it up there, maybe in a year, we jump it another 100, and then see what the difference is in percentage increases for the residential section. Look, none of this is good, I mean, for any of our users.
Because the thing
But
is-
this is necessary money, so because of what you said, I'm okay now. But I do need to have somebody give me some kind of numbers to show me what our people are gonna be paying as a base rate and per thousand over. Because these numbers are really, really strong.
The thing is, nothing is coming down, and this has been something that's been put off for so many years. You know, it's like money was spent on things that were not essential, like water and sewer.
We inherited it.
Going back a ways, we were charging commercial and industrial the exact same as residential, which was crazy with what they put into the water system. So we are way behind. We increased them 50%, but that's not near what they should have been paying all along. So, you know, that was just crazy.
The only place we make that up, Carol, is in the hookup fees. Commercial, industrial pay a higher rate hooking into the system, which is supposed to help offset all the nastiness that's created by
That
their
was
use.
the one-time fee.
Yes, but, tap-in fees are usually typically higher for commercial and industrial because they're, we're
But we
doing
want
grease
to be more
cleanouts.
industrial.
Well, understand though that
There
there
won't
are,
be any more industrial.
in our sewer use ordinance, there are industrial pretreatment standards that they're required to follow. So it's not that they're putting things into the system wholesale, if they're complying.
Right.
Yeah, one thing that's really, and I add another, I mean, I have seen issuers that go the extra level and do a cost of service study to figure out the value of each rate per user. So you have the backup information for purposes of keeping yourself in compliance for what you can charge based on the cost of the services being offered to the different end user. That could give you some kind of engineer or someone can put that together for you as a, again, it's not free, but it's something you may want to consider that gives you the leverage to decide to make a larger increase for one user versus another. Because there's a valuation of what that needs are by the user itself. To your point, Ms. Cope, you said that the commercial and industrial were paying the same as residential.
Yeah.
You want to be able to say, that's not true, you should be charging more for the others, but
Well, we started doing that, so it was increased the other year, and
It's just a question of how many users you have that can make up the difference. So
Right, you know, I've got to look at that.
Yeah,
I
it's
feel
like,
I'm gonna feel more comfortable.
like Carol said, this is all stuff that was neglected, has
Oh,
to be
no doubt,
done.
we needed to make this
And
happen, we just
I
wasn't comfortable
mean-
with these rates.
I don't know any other way to raise the funds to do
No, that's the
it.
way we have to raise them, I just don't
I
want
mean,
to see such a
I
hardship.
wouldn't wanna sell our water because the rates will go
Oh, yeah.
crazy if we
Right,
sell it.
that, that's been the
would be about
experience of Exeter for.
$240.
And
Exactly.
the care is not controlled. Okay. I feel that.
So I'm going to stop for a second and let Peter talk a little bit just about the ordinance itself. I know Joan gave a good rundown, but since he's sitting here, I was like,
Yeah, and Peter can go into much more detail about this ordinance than I can.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Jamie obviously went through the financial aspects of the loan. We're here tonight to tell you, from a legal standpoint, what council needs to do to move forward with the financing. We've talked about an ordinance which has been prepared in compliance with the Pennsylvania Local Government Unit Debt Act. That's the act that governs how boroughs are permitted to borrow money in Pennsylvania. So what this ordinance does is it authorizes the issuance of the 3 notes to finance your 3 separate projects, accepts the terms and conditions of the JP Morgan proposal, and fixes all the terms and conditions that were reviewed tonight, the interest rates, the principal repayments, the final maturity dates, the optional redemption, the optional prepayment language we talked about in June of 2028. All of that is set forth in this ordinance. So by enacting the ordinance tonight, you're basically taking all official action that's necessary to move forward with the financing. Now, the keys from the bank standpoint is that part of this ordinance, you're pledging your full faith, credit, and taxing power. And in connection with that, you're promising that you're going to budget, appropriate, and pay each year the principal and interest on the loans. Now, that's done in compliance with the act, but that's exactly what the bank is looking for its assurances that you're going to pay them back. There's no collateral, you're not pledging any assets, they're not taking a mortgage lien, none of that. It's really just an IOU from council. But, you know, it's backed up by state law, and if you fail to pay, then they do have certain remedies too. So it's more than just an IOU, it might have been a little lax, but the ordinance also contains a form of the note, and it attaches the amortization schedules for each of the 3 separate notes. So if you decide to move forward tonight, as Joan noted, what we will do on behalf of the borough is we'll file an application with the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. They will review the ordinance, the legal advertisements that were published, together with certain certifications regarding the amount of your outstanding debt and your borrowing base calculations, which is basically a review of your last 3 fiscal years, which creates a not to exceed dollar amount that you cannot borrow more than without getting voter approval. Now, you're not anywhere near that level.
I helped prepare that.
And the reason we're closing 30 days from now is because once this gets filed with the state, they have a 20-day period to review everything. So they'll take a look at all the proceedings to make sure everything was done in accordance with state law, and they will issue a stamp of approval that you comply with state law. Once you get that, then you can go to settlement with the bank.
Yeah, they don't review and say, well, this project is not feasible. What they're looking at is you follow the rules under
Right.
state guidelines.
Yeah, they're not going to second guess your independent decisions on the projects, and even what the interest rates are, they don't second guess any of that. It's really just making sure that you follow all the required procedures under state law. So let me just stop there to see if anybody has a question regarding the ordinance or the approval process. It's pretty straightforward. You've been through this before on your last one.
pretty straightforward.
It all makes sense.
So that's it. So the real next step is, if someone's interested in saying, move forward, that's the steps we have.
Where are the amortization schedules?
They're referenced, and Peter would put them in the document, but each individual amortization schedule would be located on pages, starting on page,
5, 6, 7, 8.
yeah, technically page 5 is the combined total, but, the next 3 are the individual numbers, the agencies.
And I noticed the $700,000 amount, just to use that one, you said we're borrowing 700, but, so the fees here are 47,000 is what we're borrowing?
Yeah,
47,000 is.
Yeah, the total amount, it's $7,047,000 for total principal, but what's made up of that 700 is a combination of that capitalized interest. Remember I mentioned that the first year you guys will not have an impact to your budget, so we're borrowing for just on the water fund, $22,000 to pay that interest in the first year, and the balance of that is allocated costs, total costs per fund. So again, in total, what would happen is, at settlement, total of $2 million would be available to the borough. You'd open up that account with whatever deposit, how you need to deposit, then we have this extra $66,000 you technically put it to, and that would be available to pay the interest expense for the first year.
So we're paying about.
If you're trying to calculate how much principal and interest you're gonna pay on all the debt, that's located on page 5.
So we're paying about 68,000 in fees and costs to make this happen roughly.
It's about 60. Yeah, there'll be some left over
About
money.
60. Just, I mean, look, everybody's gotta make some money.
Yeah, no, there'll be some left over money.
I'm just curious what the, I'd like to know how much I'm paying for services.
I think it's 66,139.
That's each county.
Yeah, look
No,
at
it's
page 9, it's at page 9.
That's the capital thing.
Right,
Yeah, gotcha.
at page
Yeah,
9.
if you go to page 9, you can look at legal fees, initial advisor, bank fee. Those are the 3 soft costs. And then there's a balance of miscellaneous, about $7,800 in budgeted.
That's what I was.
That'll end up in your pocket. It's just we
That
kept a
happened
nice
last
round
time
number.
as well.
I don't think there's any other miscellaneous expenses.
So sewer goes out until 2027?
Yeah, the final, so if you go to page 7, your final maturity on the sewer debt will mature on June 1, 2027. It would have been on June 1 of 2026. So it gets extended about half.
And the other 2 funds go,
Out 13 years.
but on both of those, we can prepay
Yes.
after 3 years.
By 2028, yes. I had Cole run analysis for us too, to figure out what the rate would need to be to save money. I think it was what, like 3%? Yes. So if interest rates go down in the future after 2028, there'll be economic savings if we finish that and pay less sessions.
I'm sorry, has to go down how much for us?
To about 3%, to about 3%.
If it goes down to 3%, so if we.
No, it goes to around 3%.
2, 3%.
2-3%. I will definitely let you know when that happens.
He does. He has tickler files.
I get those calls, so I.
Yes,
don't-
yeah, right.
don't know.
It's good you can set those, you know, no one forgets.
As Peter knows, I think we spent years of refunding bank loans probably every couple of years at a time, so it's just, I hope that comes back.
Does JP Morgan give generally better rates for municipalities than the general public?
Yes, because they do have the backing power of the checks and taxes. I mean, this, to get a proposal from JP Morgan Chase is pretty good. You know, they normally do really, really large transactions, so this is the first time that they've been in a couple of years for me. So, it's good news.
So Stacy, would you be able to work up a numbers on seeing what our rates would be moving forward, looking at increasing?
So we wouldn't want that professionally done based on our regulations and costs of,
Well, I'm just looking at what Michelle, here, I'll give you this is from Michelle, that this will be approved. She had said basically we're going to increase it by. She's got it right out here, just to crunch our own numbers. I don't want to spend money on a number. We can just say, well, how much is these rates going up, how much revenue on average do you think we're gonna capture by doing that? Or are we thinking that the percentage would be moving forward, percentage wise, to capture the rest of it over the rest of the 3 years? Or the 5 years? So I'll give you this.
no, I
Is
heard
that
that.
okay, Jay? We're trying to calculate out what our residential rates will be.
That's fine to have that kind of an informal study of what, and projections, that's just part of what a manager would do.
Right,
So
right,
that,
so-
yeah, that's perfectly right, but that, I mean, and there's no motion involved in that, it's just a directive. But what we're here for tonight, is the financing piece of
Yeah,
that.
I'm good, there, and now that what you said, and what you said, I'm okay with
So we need a motion and a second.
Right, a motion and a second, we have an ordinance number,
One
or ordinance number 1 of
in
2024.
2025.
Or 2025, sorry.
it. Excuse me, in that document that they prepared, it mentions Penvest and a bunch of other stuff, is that?
That's a
is that
different
taken-
document.
Right,
Is that
no.
taken out, or?
No, this was
I
the,
wasn't sure.
there was a
It's
red
nothing to do with the
line,
ordinance.
there was a red line document, and then there was the clean copy of the ordinance.
Oh, okay.
You received that by email.
I just saw some verbiage in there, I thought.
Right, if you saw, for example, some red lines, that's, the clean version is the JP Morgan proposal.
So we need a motion and a second
To adopt ordinance number
number
2025-1.
2025-1.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Why don't we do a roll call vote?
Sure. Mr. Arndt,
Yes.
Ms. Cook,
Yes.
Ms. Eisenhart,
Yes.
Ms. Falcone,
Yes,
Ms. Hassler,
Yes.
Mr. Stoffler. Carries.
So Peter does have a bunch of documents. I don't know what your agenda is for the rest of the night.
Signing documents.
Okay.
But there's only one, there's one more item on the
Okay.
agenda, but.
We're clear, or at least I'm clear for it.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you so much. Good night.
So I guess now we'll discuss the
Administrative position.
administrative position.
So due to the fact that the candidate retracted interest, I would direct council to consider tabling this for tonight's meeting Any discussion?
I make a motion to table it.
Second. They assigned a mentor, the lady from Florida Department of Public Safety.
Do you need to vote? To table?
Motion and a second has been made.
Okay.
All in favor, say aye. Roll call.
No, no roll call.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So,
Motion carried.
Thank you.
so Stacy, what's the plan? We're just for keep it out there again?
Yes.
Is there any applicants from the pool that you have that you can read?
I can look at them again, sure, of course.
We'll figure. Shepherd, not my idea, or?
Yes, that would be lovely.
I had thought, I don't know if there's any VOTEC class or if there's a girl in some kind of business curriculum that, or boy, would be interested in summer work and then once the school year starts, possibly co-op.
I'd like to get somebody in your ASAP.
I was just gonna say, there may be somebody now already that is looking for a co-op. You know, maybe in the business part of the BCTC. I'm not even sure if that teacher is down there.
But did I understand you say somebody for the summer?
Summer and possibly going on co-op.
Okay.
You know, if they want to, if there is somebody that could start and work the summer and then when the school year starts, like if there's gonna be a senior, go on co-op for a half a day, go to school a half a day and work a half a day.
I'm just gonna say there's anybody new coming into the office, there's a lot on Stacy's shoulders to do training. So I wouldn't want somebody just for the summer and then you get to find another one to start training.
Maybe even if we could get like a typist or somebody in here to do some of the typing work, we're backed up on minutes. I mean, even if it's just not all duties like you would train a regular employee, and it would parallel with us finding, maybe another employee.
Can I say? Just in the field that I work in alone, we can't find anybody and we pay a heck of a lot more than $16 an hour, so.
We've got to increase that.
If that probably has to be increased, I mean, you can go make an MTO for $18 an hour at Cheats. It's gonna be really hard to
Yeah.
find somebody to do that, in my, just my opinion, so
Well,
if the budget's there, maybe take that to
Well,
the higher end.
that's just it, and
I don't
the
think
budget
there
it
is.
should have been for the 18. That would have
Yeah.
been it, so.
Well, even with what you had said that she was requesting the lowest amount, it would be like $6,000 more a year
Yeah.
if we would agree to offer her the lowest amount.
For 30,
It's $6,240 a year.
for 30 hours a week.
For 30 hours a week. I mean, to get them to help, I think $6,000 is
Well, we need to look and
such a
see
small
where we
amount.
can come for that in the budget, where that could take it from. I mean,
I mean, 6,000 isn't that much to get somebody in here. You know, when you think about it. That's, to me, that would be worth it to get somebody in here and help them. They need the help.
There was someone from the community, and I'm sorry I don't know her name, who came up at the end of a meeting and volunteered to do typing. Do you recall who that was? Did that work out? Did you ask her to?
So it was about minutes, and that's being done at their home. We have 2 volunteers doing that at their home.
So somebody's doing typing of the minutes?
Yep.
Great.
For the January, that was the long meeting in January.
Yep, wonderful. Are they gonna continue with the others that are missing, or only do that January?
We don't know yet.
We'll see how it goes. Thank you.
Anything else?
I have one thing I just wanted to ask the council, it's not on the agenda, but I wanted to ask for a future agenda. I just wanted to ask council if they had any thoughts on establishing a nepotism policy. We don't have one here, I was looking at those, that might be something, we have a conflict of interest policy, but I don't know that we have a nepotism policy. And I was wondering if it would be okay if I drafted something for review, just to, see if that.
For a future meeting, if council wants to have that type of policy. I don't believe it's in our employee handbook. Again, many private employers and municipalities do have anti-nepotism policies. There's an upside and a downside to it. You know, at this point, it's difficult to get anybody in, unfortunately.
And I don't know that we've really had any issues with that. But I just wanted, I think it'd be something that might be a good idea. I just wanted to put it out there so that we can, it might safeguard us from some problems or at least lay out some guidelines. If we have, somebody, say your spouse works here and you're her supervisor, you probably shouldn't be her supervisor, kind of thing. So, maybe something to that extent.
Couldn't hurt to look at something like that. If you wanted
It's
to
up
draft something.
it's up to council to decide.
Yeah, just thought I'd put it out there while we were here. I don't know if it's something we can discuss at a meeting, but.
Well, if it would go into a policy handbook, it would have to be discussed.
Oh, yeah, I just mean as far as preparing something, to approve it.
Be up to council directly. It would have to go on a future agenda.
Yeah, that's why I'm bringing it up now.
Yeah.
No hurry, just.
If there's nothing else, can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Adjourn. Thank you for attending.
So you ready to start signing?
Yeah, I don't know how to take it out.
As long as you're not gonna make.
No, no, but.